that was available. So,
Yes, a maintenance deposit.
Maintenance
security deposit. Yes, sir.
And they have to have insurance and a lot of other things.
Oh,
too.
yes.
All right, move on to item 8K. This is our resolution on EMSA that we've discussed voluminously over the last few months.
I prefer to say that we're judicious in our setting of the issue. We've had workshops on it and several I'm sorry?
Well, I'd like to say just a few words. I intend to vote against this resolution in support of fire taking over emergency medical transport. I believe it's cheaper for the taxpayer. I believe it affords a higher quality of care for the citizens and patients. I am concerned, as I look at the rest of the country, that the overwhelming majority of citizens in the United States are served by a fire-based system. The top 9 cities in the country are served by a fire-based system. The public utility model is going away. In medicine, I don't like to be the first or last to do anything, and as I see this model going away, I'm concerned, as the citizens of Oklahoma City are in an outlier position. I don't think that, I think there's some things that we haven't discussed in all of our judicious discussions, and I just want to talk about that very briefly. Number one is that we do not know, nobody in this room, nobody can tell us when we are at level 0 status currently. Level 0 status means that the 911 call comes in and there's no ambulance, there's no EMSA ambulance available to serve that citizen. It is impossible, the system doesn't track it. I've asked Mr. Williamson, he indicates that the computer system is incapable of tracking that data and telling us how many times we're at level 0. The implication, I'll get to the implication in a second, but secondly, the arguments that were made last week didn't really have to do with cost or patient care. It had to do with the fact that we couldn't get out of the trust, and that we were, basically this wasn't a window of opportunity, that we were locked in. I have concerns about that, if that's the reason that we're making this decision. I think that I would like the Municipal Councilor's Office to look at the operational requirements of EMSA and whether they're meeting them, and whether failure to meet them allows us to get out of the EMSA trust. I believe that we have an agreement where EMSA is supposed to be at the scene within 9 minutes 90% of the time. But this system allows them to exclude 7% of all calls. Thousands and thousands of calls are just excluded from that formula. For any unforeseen spikes in call volume over the previous year, for inclement weather, or just to catch all other factors outside of the contractor's control. In March of this year, for example, we threw out 16% of the calls, and yet EMSA was only there in 9 minutes 74% of the time. I cannot believe that that is meeting the operational requirements of the trust. And so I would ask Kenny if you can research and explain to me whether that is in compliance, and if they're not in compliance, whether we can get out of the trust, and whether we can get out of the trust with our assets. The fire-based system is cheaper. One thing we have not talked about is the size of the city. And I use the word sprawl, and I apologize to Pat and Pete, who consider it a pejorative term, but it's one word and everybody knows what I'm talking about. I asked the first time we talked about it, Mr. Williamson, why is it that the rate of cost increase in the Western Division is increasing 3.5 times the Eastern Division? Is it partially due to sprawl? He said, no, it's 100% due to sprawl. That is the reason that costs are escalating so fast in Oklahoma City and the Western Division. A profit-based system with Paramedics Plus trying to cover 621 square miles, the public utility model is especially ill-suited for that kind of geographic size. And I think when it takes 2.7 ambulance service hours in the Western Division to achieve the same production as 2 hours in the Eastern Division, and it costs almost $100 per transport more in the Western Division, it makes more sense for fire to assume that. Fire is going to have peripheral-based stations. They can house ambulances at those peripheral systems. To have EMSA trying to drive around and cover an ever-expanding city, because I think the peripheral development is going to get worse, and it's going to be more and more difficult for EMSA to cover that size. So it's going to be more and more expensive. So in cost, one thing we haven't talked about in cost is that I think Paramedics Plus and EMSA's costs are going to increase, continue to increase at this very high, unsustainable rate. I think I think how this plays out is there seems to be a consensus we're going to consolidate dispatch. We don't want fire to go out on the non-priority one calls. We've established last week it's unsustainable to increase 6,000 calls for fire per year. So we're looking at decreasing the number of calls fire goes out a year at 20,000 calls per year. So now that's 20,000 times a year that somebody calls 911 and fire's not going, only EMSA's going. But what if they're at level 0? We don't know how many times they're at level 0. Talking to many, many firefighters, they say it's happening 8, 9, 10 times a week. But nobody knows because we're not tracking that data. So I think how this is going to play out is fire's going to go out on 20,000 less calls a year. Their child or loved one is going to have a nosebleed, a broken arm. They're going to be sitting there for 30, 40, 50 minutes, an hour. Right now what happens is fire goes there first and sits with them. And then EMSA comes and we pay $300 for the transport, whether they have insurance or not, after fire's been sitting with them. Well, now fire's not going to be sitting with them for all that time. So they're going to be sitting there until EMSA can get there. And there's going to be public discontent, and we're going to hear more complaints. And it's going to be untenable. And then Paramedics Plus is going to say we need more money. EMSA is going to say we need more money. There's increased cost. I don't buy at all the report last week, the billing estimates indicating that fire would have to contract out at 6% to do revenue collection. In my practice, I have a 2-physician practice. That's the rate I get, 6%. When you're talking about collecting $22 million, the more you collect, the lower the rate that these third parties would charge. I think people would be falling over themselves to get a $22 million contract. And I think that rates it at about 4%. I think that's another $500,000 a year. I'm frankly surprised that it costs EMSA 4% or more than $1.1 million to collect. I'm trying to figure out the staff and the salaries, and I don't see how you spend that much money. I think you can get it done for much less. The argument was made that the financial case for the city withdrawing depends on the city obtaining ambulances equipment at little or no cost. That assumes that we can't break the trust, and we'll hear from Kitty on that. Second, these capital expenditures, ambulances are run hard. I mean, they're replaced as often as every 3 years. If we vote to go to a fire-based system, we don't start for 2 years. Many of these ambulances are outdated or out of service already. So I'm not sure why it depends on us getting the ambulances at little or no cost. Let's think about what happens if we go to a fire-based system. The surrounding communities are almost certainly going to contract with Oklahoma City. We already have mutual aid agreements. We don't put Oklahoma City on this side of the ambulance to avoid inflaming or offending anyone. I just don't see the Village or the Mustang saying we want conflict with the city of Oklahoma City. We're going to seize your assets. We're going to seize your ambulances. We need each other, and I just don't see them seizing the capital. I don't think so. Then let's say we have a regional agreement here. Tulsa's not going to. They seize all these ambulances that they can't staff. I don't see that happening either. The EMSA's argument for why fire's contention that they're going to save $500,000 to $1 million a year is that they would need 9 additional dispatchers and 8 additional material technicians. I just don't buy it. Why, when you consolidate dispatch, does fire need 9 additional dispatchers? Why do we need 8 additional material technicians? When many of these ambulances will be housed at fire-based systems. They can restock the ambulances when nothing's going on. But we talk about money, money, money. We need to talk about quality of care. Realize that nothing is going to, the medical director has said he can work equally well with fire or EMSA, so there's no change there. What happens in terms of saving lives is how fast you get there. That's what determines cardiac outcomes and saving lives, that's being done by fire. Fire's getting there 83% of the time first, and those lives are still going to be saved. I think that the emergency medicine literature indicates that transfer of care from one provider to another in a short encounter is the most likely time to create error. Firefighters are all hazards responders. There's no need, if you have a motor vehicle accident with gas and oil, that they can deal with that, and then they can stay with the patient and go straight to the hospital. This dealing with the motor vehicle accident, stabilizing the patient, and then transferring it to somebody else and explaining the history and what's going on with the patient, that doesn't make sense. That's where errors take place. You maintain continuity of care by having fire extract them from the car, take them right to the hospital. Eliminating two separate agencies responding at high speed with sirens to the same emergency minimizes disruptions in traffic and the risk of motor vehicle accidents. I think if you have fire doing everything, you don't have this duplication of services, and you can have even better response times. You can have fire getting there even faster to more people, and that's what's going to save lives. The public is largely unaware of what's happening in terms of outcome every minute, your chance of survival, how much brain damage there is if your heart is not perfusing the brain, is different whether somebody gets there in 6 minutes or 8 minutes. Right now, the public is not aware of that. If fire takes over and it's more efficient, they can get there faster, and you're going to have better clinical outcomes for our citizens. I think I'm on the right side of history. If this is an 8-1 or 7-1 vote, I have absolutely no problem with that. I think this is what's best for the citizens of Oklahoma City. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Any other comments or questions, or we need a second on Councilman Ryan's motion?
I'll second.
All right. Ready to vote? Cast your votes on item 8K. Passes by a vote of